also like to thank you for allowing us into your homes for this 23rd episode of Season 3 of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And before I get into the show proper, I would just like to make a quick assessment announcement. I had an individual on my show last week, George Green, and he was on Coast to Coast AM the following Sunday, and Art Bell was interviewing him. And after about an hour, Art came on after the commercial break and terminated the interview. And I'm not really going to try to make an assessment or anything like that as to the reasoning, but just to point that out, that was indeed what happened. And I thought that was rather unfortunate that he didn't allow Mr. Green the benefit of speaking his piece for the entire show to let the viewership make up their own minds as to whether the information was valid or not. And we didn't censor him in the hour that he was here, and so I just want to make note of that point. And I would like to go ahead and introduce my guest for today's show, Darcy Kuntz, and we also have Omega, and we have Jeff Contreras, who you folks may know from the fine show Therefore I Am, every Tuesday at 10 o'clock on Channel 16.
How's it going, Austin?
And so the topic for discussion this evening is unknown superiors. And Darcy, since you derived that title for the presentation this evening, could you please explain what that means to you and your understanding of that term, please?
All right. The unknown superiors first came into existence in 1754 with when Baron von Hund founded the rite of the strict observance. And he claimed that the order was under the direction of these secret chiefs or unknown superiors, which he claimed were high-ranked Masons. And he did not name them until you hit the inner order. And the whole purpose of these the unknown superiors was the knowledge, superior knowledge, or knowledge from beyond, through people that have lived and experienced a lot more, would bring forward this information to this rite of the strict observance.
So in other words, you're saying this is the first real written record that we have offered up of what's termed at this point unknown superiors, and this is really lending to or leaning back towards the idea that there are some individuals, if you will, or some collective energy, what have you, that is behind the scenes, so to speak, that is kind of helping to direct and motivate these so-called societies?
Yeah, direct, and also impart knowledge. The members, the high-ranking members that were running this, the various orders or rites would be in contact with these unknown superiors, and they would give further knowledge and training that they would then pass on in the various grades of their rite. The rite of this strict observance had 10 degrees.
Okay.
And it was a graduating system, like a lot of the orders, and it was outside of the Masonic organization. It was not officially recognized.
So again, a fringe Masonic order?
Yes.
In those terms? Okay, understandable. And so is there a real distinction being made as to the origin of these unknown superiors, or whether even they are in body, corporeal, or whether they are energy, or...
Well, can I say something?
Please, by all means.
About the strict observance?
Yes, by all means.
Because the unknown superiors have always acted like the elder brothers of mankind.
Okay.
So they were perceived as a order of beings that assisted us in our evolutionary experiences on the planet.
But they were corporal.
Well, I want to talk about the strict observance just for a second, because Germany at the time, as we know it, didn't exist. It was Prussia, and it was a sea of smaller little states and principalities. And so von Hund lived there, and they didn't have high-grade Freemasonry. So he actually went to France, to a place called the College at Clermont, where the rites of perfection, the 25-degree system, that later became part of AASR, the Scottish Rite, and other organizations. The rite of perfection was actually done at a Jesuit college.
Okay.
Now, he went there, and the secret there was that they were holding, it was a Jacobite conspiracy. So
explain that term.
It was the whole forbidden king, and so they were hiding the pretender to the throne.
King or something like that.
Yeah.
One of those uses terms.
The Stuart family from England at the time.
Okay,
was
I'm somewhat
in France
familiar with some of this.
because the execution, I think, of Charles I.
Okay.
So when that was suppressed and Cromwell was in England and France, they were hiding out at a Jesuit college, and they developed this 25-degree system, and it was a hotbed of Jacobite conspiracy. So remember, this was 50 years before the French Revolution, but it was still kind of boiling at that time. Von Hun comes in from Prussia. He receives these degrees. He goes back to Germany and brings this high-grade quasi-Freemasonry with him. So suddenly there's a big blossom in Germany of high-grade degrees, and they're bringing all this regalia and equipment in from France in cartloads. And he's the only one there in Germany doing this kind of magical organization. So he actually brought Templarism into Freemasonry. So whenever you think in terms of like the Knight Templars and how they're associated with Masonry, it's because von Hun. It was his idea. He actually brought Templarism and said that Freemasons are the residual aspects of the Templars. So he introduced that notion.
So when people asked von Hun then, where did you get this? Did he say, I got it from...
See, it was a political thing. It had nothing to do... I mean, in his mind, it was like he was not allowed to reveal his French superiors because it was a Jacobite conspiracy and nearing up to the French Revolution. So he was his unknown superiors because of the power of silence. And it proved to be his downfall because he wasn't able to produce any certification or legitimacy, or he wasn't able to verify his claims. He simply stood on his knighthood and said, I'm a knight, and I declare that I'm a baron, and I declare that the unknown superiors have told me to run this right in Germany. And so he did.
Okay. Do you care to speak about some other examples in which unknown superior, or Jeff, did you care?
Well, I just wanted to say, just to make one thing clear.
Sure, please.
As far as the people of the time for von Hun, he said his unknown superiors were definitely human beings and not discarnate entities. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely, he did. Although he introduced the notion into Western esotericism.
Right.
Okay. And then again, there are other examples throughout history in these so-called orders, or...
Yeah, I mean, let me just say, like, the Theosophical Society took this to the ultimate degree. We have to, like, stop and bow in reverence to the Theosophical Society.
We're not going to bow in reverence necessarily, but...
but in terms of, like, of really, like, promoting the idea of the Great White Brotherhood.
Yeah, I think I'm going to...
And embellishing that.
Right, I think I'll lend to a little bit of that discussion here momentarily. But
well, how about the Martinists, then?
Please, by all means. And that's, again, you could tie it to the ideas of the French Revolution being perhaps somewhat fomented, or this quasi-political mentality that was going on through these secret societies around that time. Would you care to speak to that?
Well, actually, Darcy, do you want to take that one?
The Martinists?
Yeah.
That's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, it's actually not mine either.
Okay, but it's an outcropping of nonetheless, correct? As far as from the rite of the strict observance and how the filtering down took place?
It was also non-Masonic, and it was non-Masonic of a different kind. It was another magical order. So the Martinist order was a magical
Now, again,
society.
getting back to the Jesuit influence that you spoke of earlier, that would perhaps mean that there was some Catholicism involved at some level. Is that even remotely close to that?
Right. This is during the time period when the Catholics and the Protestants were at war. So there was a lot of king-making involved with it also.
But as far as how much Catholicism and the Mass or that teachings influenced these rites of these orders, because you said, excuse me, you said it was just Jesuit influenced or originated.
Well, the Pope had issued a bull against the Freemasons by this time, so they were theoretically operating excommunicado with the Vatican in terms of like these Freemasonic orders.
Okay, but then again, flash forward to the Martin group, didn't they also have some kind of Catholicism ties as well?
Only in as much that it's Martinist founder, as far as I know. I mean, I'm sure that Jesuits were involved at the time.
I'm just trying to tie it more so to the subject, to the energy of Catholicism, as opposed not so much the political at this point.
Right. The idea of having unknown superiors worked against the Catholic Church.
Certainly. Okay.
And so it was perceived like as a threatening
Saints were okay,
it was a
but,
threatening meme. It's like, well, wait a minute. It's like, we're in charge here.
Sure.
We've got all society under control.
Right.
Unknown superiors, who are these?
Right. We're lending over our authority to some unknown superiors. If we're ceding over our authority on earth by doing something like that. I can understand your...
Right. And these people are organizing and developing in secret societies, and they, had natural fears.
I think one important thing that the Martinists did bring into the table was they had 32 degrees. Weren't they the first to have 32 degrees?
No, the Martinists first had 10 degrees. And then that was in 1754 when that was founded. Mm-hmm. And that was Martinez Pascalis. And then in 1887 it was Teeter and Papus that reconstituted the Martinist order with 3 degrees. And that was in Paris. And it was not until 1902 when it was constituted in England.
Okay. So does anybody care to touch on any other topics before we go to the Theosophical Society?
No, how about the Illuminati? We got to talk about them.
Okay. The Bavarian Illuminati.
Okay, whoever's going to.
And the Illuminati didn't last that long. They were. We talked about last time they were founded like in 1776, but only lasted about 8 years.
Till 1885, I think.
Right,
is the last
and their big deal was also a balloon. Again, it's like you see these things. They just suddenly they're nowhere, and all of a sudden they're everywhere. And the deal there was it was like going through the Freemasonic lodges, and so there was a general clamp down.
Okay, but there, I mean, to be fair though, I mean, if you look back to the literature of those times and about that particular order, there is a lot of conspiracy or a little cloudingness because of how it was perceived that the Illuminati was trying to take over the other Masonic orders. There was some kind of a...
Or society in general, they had designs on, they were of using that for their own agenda. Okay, so that was properly accepted, that notion, and so that's the ideas of that have obviously stayed with us to the future, and there are a lot of people that have ideas, conspiracy so-called ideas derived from the notion, but clearly state there are so many organizations that have called themselves Illuminati over time, it's difficult to really get a clearer-cut idea of the true lineage from the so-called Bavarian Illuminati because it's very clouded, and there are also allegations that it did fracture into other tributaries underground after the fact, so a lot of questions remain. But I would just like to say that it kind of bring into Western esotericism again the truncated pyramid where you have like a solid physical basis going almost all the way up,
right?
But then incomplete.
Representing
but then you
the
have
mass
this other thing kind of from that's just like the flame that comes down and it completes the top of the pyramid, the eye and the triangle, and that is like an idea that is associated with the Illuminati, the eye and the triangle.
But again, that harkens back to the idea that there is a base of membership or the lower builders, if you will.
Right. I mean, they have all these organizations have their individual philosophies, but the idea of having unknown superiors or like some other agenda that's praeter-human or supernatural sort of develops through the Illuminati and then later into the 1800s.
Okay. So I guess we can jump into the theosophical influence at this point then?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go ahead and jump into that a little bit. In 1875, Theosophical Society was formed in New York. That's Helena Blavatsky, Henry Steele Olcott, and they very much brought in this whole kind of mysticism or this, they brought in a, I'm losing my train of thought here. But their idea was to bring in the ideas of the masters and to use this idea of masters, so-called, or unknown chiefs, unknown superiors, to allow interest to be derived and to build interest in their organization. And they also attached themselves to the so-called spiritualist movement, where you had the Fox sisters and the knocks that they were supposedly hearing from dead and deceased individuals. And so that influence was very much at the forefront of the Theosophical Society as well. And the idea that there are so-called unknown superiors through that tradition kind of ties into the idea that the human condition allows for much potential, and that we can evolve through the human condition to a very highly evolved state, a so-called state of masterhood, where we master the physical vessel, and we master as well the condition of love, and we express the fullest capacity of love that is possible for humanity to express. And so that position, so-called masterhood, is what some would refer to as these unknown superiors that are being alleged through these other orders. And I would also state that maybe the first written statements about unknown superiors were, the 1700s or what have you, but the idea goes back to the first self-conscious man that during the so-called Lemurian period, far, far into antiquity, when we first became self-conscious, that there was this, there were those behind the scenes that were kind of trying to watch over and to guide and give us just advice and guidance and watchovers to a certain degree, but keeping in mind that humankind, since they are self-conscious, has free will, and these individuals at no time would be infringing on our individual free will, and that's a key component of their position as well, that they don't impose on our choices, but they can give a hint or things of that nature to try to influence in that manner. And so this tradition of masters, so-called, did find its way through the Theosophical Society and other Eastern-tinged organizations, just as it did through the Western-tinged, and they all tie back to their so-called secret chiefs or their so-called unknown superiors or masters or a hierarchy at some level that they all would look to as, again, an example of a group that offers guidance, some kind of a guidance structure and a structure for them to move into themselves. Because as we perfect ourselves, we become members of that hierarchical structure as well. And that's the Theosophical slant in a nutshell. Please, go ahead, Jeff.
I think what's really important about the Theosophical Society is when they started to really publish so much.
That's a very good point.
They started publishing.
They made it really well known.
They made it very popular. They really brought in their mix of Eastern. They mixed Hinduism, Buddhism, and not only that, but the Western magic tradition.
Kabbalah was certainly involved.
Especially at the beginning, and then later on, they started moving towards the East primarily. But they really started to popularize the idea that there are discarnate entities that help guide humanity. And I think up until that time, a lot of the so-called orders or groups or societies at that time, if they had claims of some type of unseen masters or something like that, unseen entities, that up until that time, they were all actual human beings, just like wise humans that had advanced and just gave out, wisdom to the people that needed it.
Like a sage or something.
Exactly, but very human and very approachable. Yet, from this point on, what we start to see is kind of a shift towards more groups to start to rely on discarnate guides or discarnate chiefs or masters to be more of the focal point for their knowledge.
Right, good point.
But the Theosophical masters were known as the Mahatmas.
That's the Eastern term, Mahatma, certainly.
Yeah.
And the two in particular, Kuthumi and Moria were the names in particular, and they embodied a certain type of energy, if you want to use the term ray energy. Kuthumi being a second ray or love, wisdom master, and Moria being a first ray or will or power master.
Yeah, but the Blavatsky also claimed that she received letters from these masters through the
right.
They just drop out through thin air and
right, exactly.
And they published a number of books that their correspondence with the masters. I think it was A.P. Sinnett and
the Mahatma letters to A.P. Sinnett, but later on it was alleged that Blavatsky actually wrote those letters by some parties, and that's what I tend to believe, is that Blavatsky just kind of intuited her perception of the master's teachings and was trying to, again, make these ideas public. And so she, kind of just acted as if she was these two particular masters and offered up this information. Again, that's just one theory. Perhaps A.P. Sinnett was actually directly in communication with these so-called masters. That's another theory as well. So,
can I take a spiel on the Mahatmas?
Please, by all means.
The term itself comes from Sanskrit. So the Atman was the self. And later in the Vedic developments, they came up with the Paramatman, which was then later in Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, they came up with the idea that the Brahman was the Paramatman. But the Atman was a self, and there was a cosmic self, the Para-Atman. But we all have an Atman. And then Maha means over or greater.
Or above.
And so they end up with Maha-Atman. And that evolves into Mahatma. So that's where that word comes from. And the idea of a great white brotherhood.
Right, that's a good term as well, or a hierarchy.
They really entered into Western esotericism. I mean, it was really promoted by the Theosophical Society. So Blavatsky herself was considered a high-level adept by Aleister Crowley.
Now,
He also believed that he was a reincarnation of Blavatsky. Wasn't he?
No,
Or no.
Eliphas Levi.
Yeah,
Levi,
Eliphas
excuse me.
Levi, yeah.
Eliphas Levi.
now, but in India, though, did they believe that?
Well, the Mahatmans were Tibetan,
Okay.
and so the Indians might have,
Okay.
and it might actually have been true. And I have no doubt that there were Tibetan lamas there, and I have no doubt that they were part of the global consciousness, and I have no doubt that Blavatsky was part of the global consciousness. So
I would say that there are also masters so-called of all ethnic types, though. You can find, Caucasian so-called or Anglo masters. You can find masters, again, Tibetan, Egyptian, all through time, there's been ample opportunity for certain humans to reach that high level of potential, and they remain on this planet to stand behind the scenes and guide and again, indicate and give us hints from time to time. And I do think that they are many ethnicities.
Also, another thing I would say was, with the Theosophical Society was because the masters were sort of beyond the physical, it was hard to kind of prove, a lot of claims. So there was a lot of disbelief about the masters.
Right.
So I've always been wondering about the validity of I guess of masters and I guess some type of lineage,
Right.
or
But in Blavatsky's case, I don't think she was probably doing it to give legitimacy to
She
her
was very
organization.
regretful. She was very regretful of even bringing up the masters later on in her writings.
like
She
in the-
regretted it.
she realized she didn't need that.
For the Golden Dawn, I think it was actually the opposite. I actually think, that Westcott probably went about the wrong way as bringing in the cipher manuscripts or saying or discovering them or whatever. I think
It's too
I
vague.
think that there was that he was trying to say these papers come from the unseen masters,
Right.
whatever, and
Right.
they give legitimacy to what we're trying to do.
Absolutely.
When I think just the authority or the respect that the people who started the organization
Should have engendered themselves.
Exactly.
They didn't have to go to that route.
exactly.
I would agree with you. But you got to sensationalize back then. I mean, people were into the spiritualist movement. They were into all these things, and there were people that were very much fundamentalist in their particular religious approaches too. So you had to kind of shock them, I think, loose from that, and kind of give them something a little salient to kind of, hey, check this out. This is a little bit off to the norm, out of the
Right.
norm. You know what I mean?
You guys have broached it. You've already talked about Golden Dawn. We should launch right into it.
Let's go ahead. Let's get it. Let's hit it and quit it.
Like they entered a discussion because they were in communication with the inner order,
The secret chiefs.
the unknown
As
superiors.
many other groups have claimed.
So what do we say about that? What went down? Darcy is definitely. I mean, help us out. What is the synopsis to set this one up?
Well, the claim was the cipher manuscript came from an order that out of Germany, and the high-graded adept was Fräulein Springel. She was believed to be of the grade of 7 equals 4, and later on you learned about the secret chiefs. But I tracked down the models in the original sign-in book of the Golden Dawn. The first 3 names are the secret chiefs of the Golden Dawn. So, but they just had Latin mottos, and they translated into various stuff. It's in my second book. I actually list them. The first 3, they're under unknown.
Okay. Well,
So, but the Westcott and Mathers and Woodman, the 3 founders of the Golden Dawn, got their lineage from a physical person, or
and
they claimed it was
of them,
physical.
how many of them actually encountered or had dealings with Fräulein Springel?
Just Westcott.
Okay, he's the only one.
Yeah, and then later on in 1912, Rudolf Steiner and Falcon claimed that they got in contact with a niece of Fräulein Springel named Alice in Germany, but that really never went nowhere. And Steiner, it was Falcon that set up a meeting for Westcott to meet with the niece,
Right.
and he did not show up.
Well, who didn't show up? Westcott?
Yeah, Westcott did not show up.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
But Mathers actually claimed that he was in contact with the secret chiefs, which caused him to bleed from the ears when he had contact.
That didn't sound like a very pleasant experience.
Yeah, well, he kind of portrayed that it was unpleasant
Very
experience.
grueling physically, I guess.
And he was also disseminating a lot of knowledge of the higher grades of the Golden Dawn, which he claimed came from these secret chiefs or unknown superiors.
Okay.
So whatever happened in the Golden Dawn, where did they get all of this secret knowledge? It didn't come from. So if it didn't come from the secret chief, then who did it?
The cipher manuscript.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
in
where
part
did they come
cipher,
from?
and it also
Who ciphered
from. Well, it's believed that it came from various fringe Masonic rites. You know, because I think if you check F.G. Irwin, who was one of the movers and shakers in England in the time, he actually wrote a book called The Star in the West, and the ceremonies in that book are very akin to the Golden Dawn, as well as his crystal diaries. If you look in there, the altar was actually set up with the the cross and triangle and the four elements on it. I looked at the originals in United Grand Lodge of England.
And so what year was that published? The Star and the...
That was
the
never
Light
published.
of
It was a handwritten manuscript
Oh.
in United Grand Lodge of England.
Okay.
But it went bad. The same thing happened with von Hund. His strict observance actually was notable in that it failed because its unknown superiors were not able to be produced. So my question before the show to Darcy was, how does the Golden Dawn answer this? In other words, did the Golden Dawn fail when the secret chief was exposed? Or, I mean, what was the end result?
Yes, in a sense, it did fail because the secret chief was exposed, but in this case, it was Fraulein Springle. She could not be produced, and nor could the order be traced back. So, and Mathers also wrote a letter in 1900 that said that he wrote to Florence Farr stating that Westcott procured to forge the correspondence between himself and Springle, and that caused an uproar and a revolt in the Deptai in London. So what they did is they set up an executive council to investigate Mathers' allegations, and Mathers refused to recognize the executive council and tried to disband it, and in the end they kicked Mathers out.
So lack of producing
And because
superiors.
in a sense they lost their connection to the inner order, and after that the Golden Dawn slowly just wound down because they had no new knowledge coming in.
And that's why Aleister Crowley, who published a lot of the early Golden Dawn exposures, essentially,
Right.
The first one of the
well, he claimed that they had lost their connection to the inner order. So apparently that was so. There were other groups. There was the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, and they had a person named Max.
But that's a very
Theon.
kind of, I mean, the origins of that are kind of questionable as well, aren't they? I mean,
Absolutely, but it
they're kind
brings-
of like the Illuminati. It's kind of just a vague term that's kind of thrown out there, perhaps.
Yeah, but here's why I think it's interesting.
Okay.
It ties together two pieces of the phenomenon.
Okay.
Because there was someone else called Aurobindo who created Auroville over in India. Well, both of these people had something similar. They both had, in a certain sense, a connection with the unknown superiors. And the question is, how could they verify this? What was their validity? What was their link? And in both of these cases, they worked with women who scried into crystal balls and did other kinds of spiritualist mechanisms. So with the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light and Max Theon, and we have the Aurobindo, who both of them referred to their other as the mother. And so both of these traditions had touch with the unknown superiors through mediumship.
Okay, so that, to a lot of folks, would be somewhat even more questionable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's something to
Absolutely.
obviously take with a grain of salt as far as how this information was derived, compiled,
Sometimes
and
it
how
comes
was,
in the mail. Sometimes it comes in the mail.
or if
and
it's
sometimes
materialized right in your lap out of the blue.
in the reception of the Book of the Law, it was a voice
Well, okay,
coming
the
out
Book of the Law, that
corner
needs
of the
that
room.
needs a little bit of introduction, though, if you're going to speak about the Book of the Law, because a lot of folks don't know what that means specifically.
Okay. And the Book of the Law was received in 1904 by Master Therion, Aleister Crowley acting in his role as prophet for the New Eon.
So again, another instance of a channeled information.
Right. He was in Cairo. In fact, it was April 8th, 9th, and 10th, 1904, 100 years ago. We just had our centennial. And he was in Cairo, and 1 hour each day was given to him through a praeter-human intelligence called AWAS, the Book of the Law, which is a
Okay.
spiritual text.
Some would question that term spiritual, I think.
What do you mean by
it's
praetor
absolutely
human?
a spiritual text.
What do you mean by praetor human?
He appeared to be an Oriental person with shaded eyes, like a hood coming down, but had a voice. And Aleister Crowley claimed that it didn't have an accent. So it wasn't clear exactly what kind of thing it was.
But also, was this something that he was envisioning?
Voice.
He was envisioning this countenance?
No,
or was he sitting in front of this?
It was in the corner of the room and dictating to him the book of the law, which he received.
Okay, again, we're trying to kind of get a little bit to the, is this a corporeal entity that we're talking about? Somebody that's embodied, that's having an actual discussion with Crowley? Or is this just an energy that he's perceiving and describing it, as you say, as an oriental?
Is it flesh or fantasy, dude?
It's a cosmic energy in the room. It's a cosmic energy that came, in the person of Awaz.
But was it flesh for the doubting Thomases out there?
I wasn't in the room.
That's a good. Okay, we'll leave it at that.
Does he claim it was flesh?
Well, maybe it was flesh. I mean, I don't know. I mean, protoplasm of some kind that became human for a few minutes in the room. I don't know.
Okay, right.
But it was definitely
so
like a
he doesn't make a
force.
claim either way.
He doesn't actually go into the theology of that kind of detail.
And certain groups throughout time, they've again been able to attract the curious by different stories or the lineage that they would be derived, that they would say, well, we have this from the master, so-called, and this was written with their graces or what have you. And so oftentimes that was portrayed to people. Oftentimes it was portrayed to people that had more money and more influence. So, depending, again, motives have to be considered to a certain degree, because that's part and parcel of getting membership and financing your organizations. You have to have the influential and the affluential, the people with the means and the money that you can draw to your organizations. And certainly the ideas of unknown superiors would certainly lend to drawing folks in.
Well, but also the OTO actually historically goes back to 1895 when it was founded by Karl Kellner in Germany. Did you want to maybe talk a bit about?
Yeah, there were 3 adepts from the East. In this case, there was a triad of external initiators. But there was no question that they were like in the flesh.
Okay, so 3 high initiates.
Two Sufis and a Hindu faker.
Okay.
And so they initiated Kellner on his travels in the East, and then he brought back and then constituted the OTO.
Okay, and then the OTO again being more of an Eastern-tinged representation of the esoteric wisdom.
It's true. It's the order of the Oriental Templars, and so the Ordo Templi Orientis.
Okay.
And the structure was 10 degrees, wasn't it? Originally?
It was 3 grades: the Man of Earth, the Lovers, and the Hermit triads, and each of them had essentially 3 pieces in it, and so there were 9 degrees, with a culminating 10th degree.
But they all trace themselves essentially back to the 3-grade system Masonry. In essence, would you say that the 9 would be essentially a harmonic of the 3?
I don't know. That's interesting. I can't answer that.
It seems everything is derived from a 3-grade system. My interpretation of my studies shows that Western or Eastern, everything at its base level derives back from the Blue Lodge degrees, the first 3 degrees of Masonry. I'm not a Mason, but still understanding that symbology and how that is a foundation or groundwork for these orders, it ties in universally, and it would make sense that it would.
Well, in a sense you're correct, because the United Grand Lodge of England claimed the right to make and initiate Masons. So anybody or any Masonic body that was connected to the United Grand Lodge of England, that was a concordant body, had to start at the 4th degree, because the first 3 degrees were exclusively for the Blue Lodge. So the Scottish Rite starts at the 4th degree to the 32nd.
Okay.
And the 3rd degree is still considered the highest degree.
Right. Again, breaking it back to the original 3. And if you want to tie into the ideas of the grand architect of the universe, certainly have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or the supernal triad.
There's this guy Dumézil, who's a famous French sociologist. Mm-hmm. Dumézil produced this thesis that all of Indo-Aryan culture was dividable into these 3 estates.
I would agree.
We're talking like French had 3 estates.
Because it's an archetype. It's an archetype
there was the
inside
Hindu
of us.
triad of the creator, the preserver, destroyer.
Absolutely.
And then there was the Roman 3 estates, and it's always literally the Man of Earth, who were serfs or lower class, or the working people or labor.
Right.
And then there was like the knightly class, the enforcers, tax collectors, and then there was like the highest level of the nobility, and monarchies, the aristocracies.
Again, back to the truncated pyramid and that whole symbology that ties in time and time again. That's esoteric symbolism. It's neither bad nor good. It just relates to archetypes that are so wound up in our humanity that they reflect themselves in every area of human endeavor. It's just that simple.
Absolutely.
And I do believe, again, to get back to the idea of the unknown superiors, that our humanity can reflect high level of perfection, that we can demonstrate perfection over this material nature. We can demonstrate perfection of the quality of love, which is also known as pure reason, and that we can portray and embody that quality by our actions. That this evolutionary process has been passed on through these so-called societies, through these initiatory systems, and this is allowing for our humanity to join the ranks of these so-called unknown superiors, and that we can measure up to the high mark of those that have come before us, and that these systems are in place. They're in place for a reason. They haven't gone away for a reason. They've kind of been veiled or obscured in certain areas, but nonetheless they are relevant and valid, and they're still applicable in our day and age. Jeff, you've been quiet for a while.
Yeah, I guess I have. But I was just thinking to myself, hearing all this about, secret chiefs and, unseen masters or all of that, and I can understand, where they were coming from back then, putting myself in their mindset, but how relevant does that make it today? How relevant are secret chiefs today? How relevant are Mahatmas today? What is the relevance to just the people out there watching television?
I have an answer.
Please.
I have an answer. It has definitely become more rarefied. In other words, what started off with the strict observances of some knights in France, I'm not going to tell you their names, and then it became more and more refined. The idea became more developed as the Theosophists raised it to a science with the Mahatmas, who were entities beyond humans who guided us through evolutionary experiences and awakened the Kundalini energy and took individuals, their human personalities, and opened them to and they recognize themselves as a ray of cosmic energy. And then it goes further, though, where the AWAS comes in, and it's almost a completely spiritual thing. And then we see in modern groups the presence of egregores, which are ad hoc totem entities for groups that rise up like unknown superiors in the field, far away from centralized organizing entities. So these unknown superiors are just coming up through the cracks of our society. I mean, they're all over the place.
So you feel that they are relevant and valid, and that they are making their presence more so known in this day and age, and that they're more intricately tied with the activities of man, perhaps?
It certainly is an optimistic thought.
That, I tend to, that's
I think
what
it's very
I tend
optimistic
to.
that
That is my belief system.
Right.
That they do approach humanity as we show that we are worthy of approach. The quality of mind is reaching a high point of culmination in humanity, and so by that being the case, we're able to have a more mental approach. Also keeping in mind that these unknown superiors, my interpretation again being that they do occupy a very refined physical vehicle, but nonetheless they have the capacity to step outside of that physical vehicle, and so they can contact, teach, and instruct or heal at the dream level. At night when we're sleeping, we can receive instruction. They can also, again, lend their consciousness across vast distances and use a telepathic type means to contact people. Again, kind of putting a little bug in people's ear, but not imposing on free will, just giving a little hint, just giving some kind of a guidance, so to speak, and we can choose to use it if we want or not. And that's my perception, that these individuals are, the approach is getting closer to our humanity, and we will be able to work hand in hand with these individuals in the very near future, I feel personally.
I have a question also, along the same lines of how is it relevant? What is the difference between contacting a secret chief and then contacting the spirit of a dead relative or something like that? What's basically the difference between that type of contact or that type of guidance and the type of channeling that's so common today?
I'm going to answer that then. Okay. Channeling, yes, it's just you open yourself up randomly and something just happens to come in, and kind of like George Green, my guest last week. This information came allegedly from these Pleiadians just randomly to him, and he started jotting it down, and then it became more of an appointed kind of thing where he would do it regularly, as channels so-called do. But then if there is a corporeal entity that is a living man or woman that is demonstrated, again, this high level of evolution that does exist on the planet, that lives on the planet in a house, not in a busy city generally, but lives on the planet and does interact with its group of other highly evolved individuals and can communicate, again, in a hierarchical means, and they have a council structure, so to speak, or again, a hierarchical structure that allows them to contact and influence in their various areas of endeavor, whether that be scientific, governmental, religious, what have you, but that they are indeed real humans. They just have extra human capacities. But a dead person is an energy that's, you can't contact the true essence of a deceased person. You're only contacting the astral remnants, shells, thank you. So you're not really, a channel in that sense is not really contacting a high-level spirit or things of that nature normally.
Can I also, something occurred to me, this
Yes.
would be a useful distinction, is that
Please.
there's like the white school of magic,
Right.
and then which is concerned with universal liberation of all sentient beings.
And uplifting of our evolutionary process.
Evolution, Kundalini force.
Certainly.
And then there's the black school, which serves
Opposition to that.
hinders that.
A yin and a yang, if you will.
And it takes no part in open affairs. And then there's the yellow school, which is more like Taoism, which is unconcerned with the affairs.
Okay.
And then on the other side, out of that system altogether, is the idea of black brothers, who are actually like the ones who are out to confront the system. So the black school of magic it sounds evil,
Has its
but it's
own
not.
unknown superiors.
It's just that it's Gnosticism and Buddhism. So, like for instance, Buddhism is sometimes considered nihilist, but it's just it's just classified that way.
But I would say there also is a black lodge, so-called, that people could.
It's usually a lodge of black brothers, which is not the same as the black school of magic. So that's why I wanted to distinguish that. So you have like this white magic, yellow magic. You have that,
Right,
and then there's other ways of organizing it. But then the black brothers, a lodge of black brothers, would be a completely separate thing. So the reason I say that is
would be the antithesis to the Great White Brotherhood, in other words.
they oppose the evolution of human.
Right, exactly, or an antithesis to the Great White Brotherhood's efforts.
And so the reason I say that is they might channel negative energies malignant to the human race.
Certainly.
But it may be, and the AA is considered a school of the white school.
Okay.
And so it would channel, theoretically, like AWAS then would be a white school channeled entity. And so that would be a positive direction for the evolution of the species.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, let's go ahead and grab some calls, Jeff. You want to handle the box?
Line 1, you're on the air.
Okay, thanks for that call. Thanks for watching.
Okay. Line 2, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hey, how's it
Hello.
going?
Okay, my question, I'd like to get y'all's opinion on a character I've heard of. His name is Maitreya. What do y'all know? Does that relate to unknown superiors? What is that?
Let me grab that one if you don't mind. Okay, Maitreya is an
Good
Eastern
question.
term that refers back to, there supposedly will be a Maitreya, like there's cyclic periods of time where an avatar comes into manifestation. And there
First
are people...
of all, the word is a title.
It's a title,
It's
exactly.
a Buddhist title.
It's a Buddhist title for a high level of personage that would supposedly come in like a savior type individual.
Second coming of the Buddha.
Right,
Second
exactly.
coming of the Buddha.
Right, it'd be the second coming of the Buddha, exactly. So kind of, you can see the Christian references that are similar in that sense. Nonetheless, the main proponent of the Maitreya mythos or information, as far as the West is concerned, is a gentleman named Benjamin Creme. And he's oftentimes lumped in with Alice Bailey and that organization. But there is no connection aside from that. He's borrowed the Alice Bailey information to use to bring forward this idea that there is a Maitreya, which they have pictures of Maitreya, and they can show you these pictures of this ready-made guy that appears from time to time in various places, and he is allegedly this savior-type energy incarnate in a physical vessel that they refer back to, that they call Maitreya. And this is what many fundamental Christians fear is the Antichrist, so-called. But keeping in mind that this Maitreya individual and the Benjamin Creme stuff is not affiliated with the Alice Bailey stuff. They've kind of, again, amalgamated or leached on or piggybacked themselves to that body
And
of
I have this
information.
to say about Maitreya. If you see my shows in December, you know how I feel about Jesus and how he was they set him up to be the avatar for the Piscean age. Well, I feel the same thing is going on right here, right before your eyes with this Maitreya character. I'm not going to, argue his holiness or anything like that, or even whether or not he exists or not. But what I will argue is that 200 years from now, they'll be saying that Maitreya was the second coming, that he did exist, and that basically setting us up for him to be the avatar for this new age that's coming in here, the next 2,000 years. And so that's how I feel about it. And on my show, we'll talk about it more definitely.
So in other words, it can be
December.
spun by those that are wielding that information.
Definitely.
And they can use it to their own ends, and they can have an agenda for the Aquarian age that they can, just as you say, you allege that those folks did with the whole Christian mythos back then.
And history is always
took the
repeating
story and
itself,
ran
and I
with
feel
it.
like that's going on right now.
But there's hope. I have a piece of hope.
Please, by all means.
Aleister Crowley, Master Therion, the Law of Thelema, has an aeonic. It's a post-Christian religion. So it's a type. What happened in the last part of the 1800s was this Darby. He was in the Plymouth Brethren, and he had this idea of dispensationalism. Dispensationalism is big amongst the apocryphal Christians, and so it's the idea of having different phases, and that the Bible should be read in various phases. And that we're in the last phase, the end of times kind of thinking.
End times phase.
And the Book of the Law essentially supersedes that. It was an actual procession of the equinox. The rituals of the old time are black, and we don't have any need for that. So although the Maitreya may or may not be here, it may or may not be relevant.
Interesting. Caller, did you have any other?
I'm sorry.
Okay,
Next caller.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a question for Mr. Kuntz.
Okay, go ahead.
Kuntz.
Mr. Kuntz.
Okay,
All right.
next
line,
caller.
line one, you're on the air.
You're dead, Jeff. Fact bashers unite.
Oh, goodness gracious, from the grave.
I'm telling you, that's oldie right there. Line two, you're on the air.
All righty, this is Crazy Mo.
How's it going,
Mo.
Moses?
You know, Maitreya and Osama bin Laden look just a little bit similar.
Actually, you're very true about that.
There is a similarity between what I've seen represented as Maitreya and Osama. Yes, there is a definite similarity.
You got a funny for us, Moses?
Yeah, these are some transmissions that I received from the secret masters. You can just a little bit. It's kind of weird. I'll just play a little bit of it. See if you can make anything out of it.
I did make something out of
That
that.
was a pretty heavy message, man.
I'll take notes.
Thanks for the call, Moses.
Thanks, Moses.
One thing I wanted to add about secret chiefs or just getting information inside your head from something that you consider not to be you, and trusting that information. That's a tough one. Just because you start hearing things in your head doesn't mean you should act on them. 9 times out of 10 when people start hearing voices in their head, they're telling them to do bad things. And just because of voices in your head telling you to do good things, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting correct or positive information. But 9 times out of 10, the way you can tell whether or not what you're getting is some ego reflection or not is if you're getting information that's about how to help improve your life, chances are, you should probably act on that. It's not going to hurt you either way, whether or not that's ego reflection or not. If the information is telling you, look, improve your life by doing this. But a lot of times people get these esoteric transmissions from discarnate entities, and they're always those, oh, I just talked to the secret masters, and they told me that you needed to do this. If you ever hear somebody say that, you run. You just turn around and you run away and you never talk to that person again because they are full of crap. Because some secret chief would never go into somebody else's head and give them information that was vital for you to have. If it was vital for you to have, they would go directly into your head and they would tell you themselves. So don't fall for that. That is a big way that a lot of people, they just pull people into their little group, and then they start to make themselves little demagogues, and you could have a possible David Koresh situation going on. So when people are telling you that they're getting information from wherever, and it's about you, don't you believe it?
Okay, very good point of caution. Please, go ahead.
And Aleister Crowley was very much into this too. And in fact, this is a good reason to belong to a magical order or to hang out with mature magicians, because there's the idea of testing your vision.
Right, sure.
And so there's a whole long sequence of work. We do these rituals, and you meet with superhuman entities, and you essentially test them. You use attributions off the Tree of Life. You know, if they claim that they're a spirit of Mercury, but they don't know the Hod is associated with Mercury on the Tree of Life, then you should banish them.
Lower
and
intelligence.
so you want to do banishings, and then you can do some invocations, and then you can do scrying. You can meet with some of these entities on the astral plane and test them.
Okay, and I would say this simply: trust your intuition. The intuition is of the nature of the soul, and you can certainly get from your own soul much information, as Jeff was saying, that direct connect of your own self, your own higher self, telling you something, giving you some indication of what to consider. That can often be from your own internal higher aspects of your own self. So trust your intuition. Use some sense of discernment, because a lot of information is available, but as to what's going to feel right to you, please use that sense of discernment, because not everything is right for everybody across the board. You know, that's just something to consider.
Wait, I have a question. Like, I'm not going to call in. I don't have my phone with me.
Okay.
Can anyone get in contact with the unknown superiors or a secret?
I would say nay.
What's the answer?
Nay. Vibrational, because it's vibrational.
Yes or no?
I would say the answer is yes and no. It's like anybody could be a professional golfer, but are you going to actually put in the time, the practice, the dedication to the work to become a professional golfer? And most of us aren't. So if this is what you really want, if you want to start having contacts or communications with discarnate entities, and you start working towards it, then I agree. Then yes, it can happen, and anybody can do it, but you have to be dedicated.
Absolutely. That's a really good example of the golf, because everyone can imagine that they would love to play golf.
Right.
But there's a set of skills, and not everyone's a Tiger Woods.
Fair enough.
All right, let's try to get some more calls here.
Sure, sounds good.
Line 1, you're on the air.
Terminate faggotry.
It's line
Some
1
real
tonight,
winners,
I tell
man.
you. Line 2.
Yeah, my son's been looking at this program, and he's been coming in talking all wacky. And I'm wondering, what are you putting into his mind about this stuff? Is this Pokemon or something like that?
No, Pokemon was just made up.
Pocket monster.
That was just like a Japanese fad. This is like Western esotericism. This goes back hundreds.
We're
and
just
thousands of years.
trying to provoke thought, and we're trying to get people to think for themselves and to think about some things they may not have considered before. So if your son is actually considering something, thinking about these ideas, you know, I would say nurture him and ask him why he's thinking about these things. Why is he talking about these things? Why is this of interest to him? If you are interested in what interests your son and you are a nurturing parent, then you might want to consider taking that approach.
Line 3, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, it's quite a collection of people you have there tonight. I was just wondering, it's been crossing
Sounds like a
my mind
collection
all
of a
day.
Scott on the phone calling, though.
Yes, this is Scott.
What's your
I
question,
was thinking
Scott?
about this all day. Is there any scientific evidence of what happens to you after you die?
Some would say yes. Some say you can weigh the soul, and it has a specific weight that you could test over and over again. And there is some scientific evidence, but the mainstream science doesn't really go for that and hasn't considered it as real. They think it's still hokey. So time will tell.
I don't think that there is a science for that type of science. You know what I mean? Science wasn't created to examine that particular aspect
The
of
unseen.
life.
They have to have
you know
things
what I
they can
mean?
work with.
And I think if there are scientists that are trying to push that field forward, and they will tell you all day long that they have reams and reams of evidence that, you know, that the body does exist after death. But, you know, since that's not considered mainstream science, you know, most people don't pay attention to it.
Anyways, we're alive. We should be really thinking, wow, this is like our opportunity.
Exactly.
We are on the historical stage. We can transform humanity and save the species.
That's
That's how I tend to look at
that's
things.
one of the best points that can be made from tonight's show is that no matter what type of secret chiefs are out there, or discarnate entities, or anything like that, if they can't help you improve your life now or make your life better or happier in some way, then you're wasting your time.
Yeah, we're not looking towards a promise of some future heaven and some playing with the harps and all that kind of thing. We're looking towards what we can do practically now to implement some thought now, and again, try to uplift the condition as much as we're able to now. That's the whole fraternal idea that's derived from Masonry and these esoteric orders, that you're trying to uplift yourself to help others.
And there's also, I think, through good living, being virtuous and doing the right thing.
Certainly. Which are all expressed. Esoteric orders, if they aren't expressing these bare basics about good living, being of good moral standing, good character, then that is not a true esoteric order. It's some sham.
And it builds character. It builds character in a sense of follow through. Like wisdom might be the ability to see the right thing to do, but virtue is doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
It's
absolutely.
like being a doer.
Right, because we can all sit on the couch or sit on the fence.
That's why they call it great work. It's not great play.
It's not great observance.
Right, it's great work.
Yeah, good point. Can we get maybe one last call?
Yeah, I guess so. Line 2, you're on the air.
Pow.
All right.
All right, one other last call. Line 3, you're on the air.
Yeah, my son's crazy as hell, and you've been putting it...
I tell you what, take the bong away from your son, and it'll be all right, okay? It'll wear off in a couple of hours. It'll be okay. Line 1, real quick.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Guy went from 2 to 1, just like that. Amazing. All right, so that's it for calls tonight. We got about a minute and a half left. Closing statements, Omega?
What's the future? Where do we go now? Where is the unknown superiors of the future?
I say we both become them, and we embrace the ones that are already in activity, and we can merge the work of the hierarchy, so-called, with the work we're doing here.
Not the last minute.
Okay.
So can we become unknown superiors?
I think we can if that's where you want to go, if that's the direction that you really want to go to. I probably don't recommend it. I don't know if I would want to go in that direction. I see stuff like that and I go, too much hard work for me. You know what I mean? People who watch my show know I'm lazy
outside
by
your grade
nature,
level, buddy.
and I don't know if that's in it for me. I hopefully though that some people's natures are for that, because that they will help me when I get to that level.
Okay, Darcy, cough it up. What you got to say? What's on your mind?
I think that celebrate life, enjoy it, be a good person, and get to know yourself and study and find something that works for you and follow that path.
Man, know thyself. That's a good one. I've heard that before somewhere. Okay, well, I want to thank my fine, esteemed panel for coming down again, and we'll have to have this Esoteric 4 discussion panel roundtable.
Well, we'll be doing
again.
the double show, I think, in
June. Yes.
So.
Okay, cool. And also, I won't be live next week. We'll have a tape show. I think we're going to have the previous show when we were on before. So if you folks
I
wanna...
will be live next week, though. So
okay, check out their 4 a.m. Tuesdays, 10 o'clock, Channel 16. Also, Reality Expander, Thursdays, Channel 16, 10 p.m. And I want to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. And I just want to thank Austin for tuning in. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Yeah.